Welcome to another Interesting MD episode. I'm your host, Rob Beck, and today I have with me Dr. Mark James, told me about his scuba diving.
As a youngster, a late uncle of mine was a Navy diver, dive instructor through a system called the British Sub-Aqua Club. So our younger son at about age 14 thought he would like to explore the diving as an option. Totally out of the blue, no encouragement from me or from my wife. He just thought this was a great idea, we should try it. On a whim, Gail took him up to the local dive store, and they do go on excursions, annual excursions to somewhere warm and good diving places. It was a case of, well, yeah, sign up for an open water course. Just how about it? Like starting tomorrow evening, Friday evening. And so that's how it started. I got a call at work, and Gail said, I've just signed you up with Dane to get involved in this little madness. And I thought, oh well, in for a penny, in for a pound.
But what kind of courses do you guys do through them, and what did you do with them?
It's several hours every day in a classroom, as well as several dives a day.
Welcome to the Interesting MD podcast, the show about what doctors do when we aren't seeing patients and how this can help us find balance and prevent burnout. I'm your host, Rob Beck. Welcome to another Interesting MD episode. I'm your host, Rob Beck, and today I have with me Dr. Mark James. So Mark is the first person who has actually reached out to me, which makes me so happy, as I have always enjoyed my interactions with Mark. So he is an intensivist in Nanaimo, where I previously worked. And this is a casualty of me living 2 hours from where I work, because I was never actually able to get to know and to fully understand and appreciate the things that everybody else did around me. And I always knew Mark was a great guy and knew that he wasn't from Vancouver Island, but I didn't really know that much else about him. Mark actually reached out to me through word of mouth and told me about his scuba diving. And I think that this is fascinating. And so I am very, very excited to get to learn more about Mark today and for him to share his hobbies with you. Welcome, Dr. Mark James.
Gosh, Rob, very generous. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity. As you pointed out right at the beginning, we talked about serendipity in the pre-briefing, as it were. But this was truly meeting someone else who said to me, "Gosh, reach out to Rob. He might have a space for you somewhere, and you might have a story to tell." And this is in the context of one of my other ICU colleagues, Andrew McLaren, who you'll be chatting with, and of course with Mallory. Interesting, a small community. It's sort of a little momentum being gained within a relatively small space.
Well, I really, really appreciate it. So again, thanks for coming on. And can you just tell us a little bit about where you came from and your background, where you grew up, where you went to school, did your training, and how you ended up on Vancouver Island?
Yeah, we mentioned serendipity too. That word's going to come up again. But in part of this introduction, I grew up in South Africa. Formal education, other than my Canadian fellowship, was done in South Africa, with a little bit of time spent in England. So I grew up in a little town, a city of Port Elizabeth, along the eastern Cape Coast. About, if you have any recollection or any idea of the geography of South Africa, it's along the eastern seaboard, about 600 kilometers east of Cape Town. Average sort of middle-class childhood, all good. Went off to university with the aspirations of being a marine biologist. That sort of turned my crank for a little bit, but then I realized it was pre the upswell of the marine industry, as it were, with farmed fish stocks and the like. So this would be in the early 80s, and I realized making a living as a biologist wasn't really on the cards. However, I didn't totally forego it, in that I applied for a postgrad program in it, but at the same time I applied to medicine, and the boat was literally due to sail to the South Atlantic down to Antarctica on the Friday, and I got accepted into medicine on the Tuesday. Anyway, life then changed a little. Did medicine and then did anesthesia training back in South Africa. There were some push factors to leave South Africa towards the end. There was a carjacking, there were a couple of burglaries, there was a home invasion, and a friend's son being killed in a hit and run, which prompted us as a family to leave. And so we left in the late 1990s, came via Britain. I did some ICU time in England, ended up in Saskatchewan in the late 1998. Worked in ICU primarily there, then challenged Canadian exam, the Royal College exam in anesthesia, and I've been an ICU doc and anesthesiologist within the Canadian system ever since. And then moved to the island. There was a job opening in 2017, but we moved out in 2018 as a family to Nanaimo. And the draw here was the diving. And that was just fortuitous. That was the way it worked out. Okay. It wasn't looking for a job. A job came across my horizon just after I finished the dive trip to Port Hardy. And I thought, oh, how do I get back here? And then guess what happened? I came back. Yeah. Oh, we arrived.
Well, so since today's episode is about scuba diving, so how did you get into that? Were you scuba diving back when you were in South Africa, or was that, you lived along the coast? Was that something that you did growing up, or?
Yeah. So little forays here and there. As a youngster, and a late uncle of mine was an ex-Navy dive instructor through a system called the British Sub-Aqua Club. That's an organization that continues on in the British format and in the British Isles, and has largely as an international organization been somewhat superseded by the likes of PADI as the biggest commercial organization. But this predated PADI and NAUI. So I dabbled in that for a space, then went to university, did a little bit there as in my first degree, but not lots. But the passion was there because that's my interest, and just sort of exploring what's in the tidal ponds and then beyond the tidal pools, as it were. When I moved to do medicine, I moved inland to Pretoria, so the opportunities to get to the coast and dive frequently were far fewer, and the interest dwindled. Then family and kids came along, and certainly it was, I wouldn't say it was a non-existent thing, but it was certainly hit and miss.
The diving in Saskatchewan is terrible from what I understand. So
totally. Green water lakes, visibility measured in inches, not feet, those sorts of things. However, that's where the next impetus to undertake some diving opportunity arrived. So our younger son at about age 14 thought he would like to explore the diving as an option, totally out of the blue, no encouragement from me or from my wife. And so he just thought this was a great idea, we should try. On a whim, Gail took him up to the local dive store. There is one in Saskatoon, and they do go on excursions, annual excursions to somewhere warm and good diving places. But it was a case of sign up for an open water course. Just how about it? Like starting tomorrow evening, Friday evening. And so that's how it started. I got a call at work, and Gail said, I've just signed you up with Dane to get involved in this little madness. And I thought, oh well, in for a penny, in for a pound.
Yeah, and fine. Why not? Yeah, go right ahead. So,
I think if you would ask Gail now that there was a moment of insanity, she might have some regrets around in terms of financial costs and whatever. We can come to that in a bit. And that's how it started, And we started off with a really the simple start. We, as everyone starts out, in the open water space with a basic qualification, and then did an advanced certification through them. And those were the beginning steps.
So once you and your son started doing this, over what kind of a time course was that? That you do your open water certifications, and where'd you guys go after that?
Sure. So within that first year, we went through the open water and the advanced open water, and then had the luxury of traveling off to New Zealand to a niece's wedding. And so we spent a month in New Zealand, and he and I got to dive a pretty special place up on the North Island. It's called the Poor Knights Islands. Just gorgeous diving. It's in many ways it's world class, as is Northern Ireland, north part of Vancouver Island. It's just warmer waters and bluer waters. As opposed to the green waters we have here, but truly special diving, and that was somewhat inspirational and gave us an opportunity to then. It didn't put our training on hold, but certainly gave us an opportunity to rethink about where we might want to go with this. And the next part of this journey was through the dive store owner who had previous experience with another organization, Global Water Under Explorers, GUE.
Okay.
He invited now a friend of mine, but at the time just an instructor, out from Vancouver Island. He lives down in Duncan, Maple Bay, out to Saskatchewan to teach a course. We were then students enrolled in this course. We were 2 of the 3 students enrolled in this course, and that started a whole different journey.
And so that's through Global Underwater Explorers?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So I was kind of looking up the website a little earlier. There's lots of different certifications, there's lots of different things, but what kind of courses do you guys do through them, and what did you do with them?
At the course curricula have shifted in the last year a little, to expand the curriculum a little and to make it probably a little less onerous to complete in the time as allowed. The beginning, we started with something called fundamentals. With that view, the fundamentals course is quite a strenuous course. It's several hours every day in a classroom, as well as several dives a day. And the intent at the end, if I were to backtrack this just a little bit, backstep this a little bit, Global Underwater Explorers is one of the original agencies who are defined as DIR, or doing it right. The problem with that designation is that our language is somewhat oppositional, and it sort of implies the other agencies are doing it wrong.
Doing it wrong, DIWs. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas I would like to view it in a different way, in that their perspective, though, is they've designed their whole curriculum, be it from the most fundamentals to the highest cave certification, or the highest CCR certification, or the highest mixed gas certification, under the banner of beginning with the end in mind. That's a slogan they've used in the past. And what that implies is that whatever the processes you start with, everything is scalable as you move through the levels.
Right.
And it just means tacking on equipment to a really solid foundation, or equipment and skills onto a really solid foundation. That's the intent. And if the analogies we can draw in residency or in fellowship training, you have a medicine has a good physiological, pharmacological, and anatomical basis, and then you build in path and chem path and all those other, and onto that foundation in order to appreciate patient care. The DIR philosophy resonated with me really well. They weren't discrete courses that you could do through other agencies, perhaps, where they didn't seem so well connected. It just made more intuitive sense for me to look at this. It wasn't easy. I did that a couple of times. In order to get through fundamentals, we both explored the course a couple of times, and
that's okay. That's all right. No,
but the value lies in the education, not necessarily the certification. So I think that too is one of a big driver in where I've gone, is that I've appreciated education and training more than the plastic card that arrives in the mail.
How long did you and your son, how much time did you and your son, this sounds like it was just the two of you guys, right? Doing this? In your family, though, it was just the two of you? Or was your wife coming along? Or?
No, she's above the water kind of gal. She'll sit on a boat, on a kayak, whatever. And she has snorkeled when we've been in the warmer locations like Hawaii or Mexico, but she's not an under the water kind of person. We have an elder son who took diving by a different route. He's a respiratory therapist who lives out in Moncton. When he did his undergraduate stuff in Halifax, he started free diving, and it's something that doesn't inspire me at all. I've got that's why I carry tanks of gas on my back. I can breathe in, breathe out.
Right.
Whereas he holds his breath and does a pretty good job of it. And he got involved in scuba purely he was home for a vacation and said, do you mind if I give it a whirl? And I said, tell you what, why don't we just sign you up with a Discover Scuba type arrangement? And that's the way he started. Then has subsequently gone on to do some scuba, and he's done the fundamentals course, and he's a pretty squared away diver. I enjoy diving with him. I dived with him about a year ago when he was last out on the island. But yeah, he's an awesome youngster to get to dive with.
That's great. So you guys are spending a lot of time together, and use this as a way to kind of have a connection, especially when they were younger, before they were moving off. And
Totally. And COVID times, when they moved home for a brief bit, they were both at university at the time. We got to do a lot of diving, because that's pretty much all you could do was get out into the water.
The only distancing you could do is go several kilometers out on the water. And
right. Absolutely.
Where else have you guys gone? How did that get you out to, where was it, Prince George, you said, when you were on a dive trip? And
Port McNeill. Yeah.
Port McNeill.
Port McNeill, on the way on the north end of the island. Yeah, that was per chance. So that would have been 2017 or so. 2017. The same dive group in Saskatchewan organized a charter for 7 days up on North Island. Things that may resonate with your listeners and viewers is a place called God's Pocket, or and then Browning Pass and Browning Passage and Browning Wall. It's a very energetically rich environment. And so as a consequence of the biomass that's there, lots of wildlife, both from the invertebrate stuff that grows on walls and reefs, right the way through to big cetaceans, whales, big.
Yeah, is that kind of like the narrow part of the island where the whales pass through during the summer, or
It's north of that. It's part of the northern part, I guess, of the Salish Sea, or to the north of the Salish Sea, north of Campbell River and Comox. But beautiful part of the world to dive. And so when we dove there, I thought, after diving there for a week, that is my inspiration to come back here. How do I get to dive in this neck of the woods again? An advert for a job that came across my desk, the job here in Duncan or in Duncan, and I happened to interview here, and I got a job. In anesthesia, but commuted for the better part of 3 years, until COVID came to do I still had a critical care practice in Saskatchewan.
Oh, wow. That's quite a commute.
Yeah, it's like 2 weeks a month I spent, or 10 days a month for sure. I spent for about 2 years traveling back and forth. And then COVID changed that landscape too, and work picked up here, and the hospital moved on to a different model of care for critical care here, and of course our patient population ballooned, critical care patient population ballooned, so there was more than sufficient work to go around.
Now, where do you go, like when you're just on a day-to-day basis, where do you go around and go scuba dive? I assume that you don't just go right after work, but what kind of things are you doing these days?
I think for once again, for your viewers and listeners to know that we're a pretty neat community of divers on the island. From a variety of agency perspectives, there's a fairly large contingent of GUE divers, and I do tend to spend probably the majority of my time within that community. However, the 2 dive stores in Nanaimo, or 3 dive stores in Nanaimo, 2 of them I have closer ties with, and I do dive with them on occasion. And they train and certify pretty squared away divers too. So I'm quite comfy diving in those recreational worlds. But when I move into the technical mixed gas diving spaces, or when I'm diving my rebreather, I tend to limit my teammates to those within the GUE community, and we all have similar qualifications and skill sets.
Okay.
And that's where the safety lies.
Yeah. You don't want to go down with me doing something that's very technical and very difficult and dangerous, because not only are you going to be okay, but you have to deal with me not being okay, right? Well,
therein lies part of that team philosophy within the GUE group. But the GUE philosophy is sort of whatever you carry you carry redundant stuff, everything from gas, regulators, lights. And the reason for that is because that belongs to your teammate should they get into trouble. And the best teammate are those teammates, or is that teammate who has the resource to share.
Interesting. So it's not for you. It's not necessarily just a redundancy for you. It's a redundancy for everybody.
Correct. And so as a consequence, we dive in 2, 3, 4, 5 person teams. Probably the most efficient team being that of a team of 3, where you have a spare brain, a couple of spare hands, a whole pile of other spare equipment. When one divers might be in a spot of bother, and having someone else come to their rescue or solve the problem.
Yeah, well, no, probably not. So when you're talking about technical diving, so I think that most of us, when it comes to mind, that it's like, okay, we're diving and we go out on a reef, we, flip backwards off a boat or something like that on a trip, and you're down and you're looking at fish and whatever. So what's the difference between kind of recreational diving like that and then a technical dive, and when you're using different equipment like mixed gas and rebreathers and things like that? What's that?
And I think the fundamental difference between a recreational dive and one that's defined as a technical dive is a consequence of both the depth and the time, because there comes an overhead environment. So if you think of a cave structure or a wreck type environment, so those environments bring their own sets of risks to the conversation piece, and they also add a significant element of planning, as in all dives should be planned, but these add an added element of planning, particularly around gas utilization. What defines a technical dive is more around the planning and the complexity of the dive, recognizing that the dive in and of itself will be either in an overhead space or there'd be a theoretical overhead enforced by a decompression obligation. And most of those dives, the decompression type dives, will have a mixed gas as part of their, and then the most common mixed gas would be helium. And the reason we bring helium into that picture is twofold. One is to diminish the oxygen concentration, because oxygen has a toxicity at depth. And in addition, as your depth increases, your gas density goes up, and worker breathing will then go up. And CO2 then becomes part of your problem. How do you offload CO2 safely and effectively? And helium is part of the solution to both of those problems. It dilutes out the oxygen on one hand and lessens the density of the gas, so that your gas becomes safer to breathe at depth, and you can get rid of your CO2 load.
What are the depths that you have to go through when you start worrying about that?
As an organization, so once again, I'll speak about the GE process more than the others, because I've done no technical training through any other organization, and I know the GE process better. So the GE process would limit folks on non-helium containing gas to about 30 meters or 100 feet.
Okay.
And you would dive safely to that level with 32% enriched air. We don't typically dive air in our tanks. We dive enriched air, and so we would limit the depth to 30 meters or 100 feet with 32% oxygen. Anything beyond that, we'd anticipate a diluent brought into that mixture, and that'd be helium, in order, say, to limit your worker breathing by making the gas a little less dense. And then, of course, your FiO2, so your inspired oxygen, will drop down to around the air concentration of 21%. And the deeper you go, there'll be increments, but the deeper you go, the less oxygen there'll be in your mix, and the more helium there'll be in your mix. So the ratios, we have something called standard gas mixtures, and we have depths that are associated with those. And so the standard gas mixtures for the first down to, let's call it 50 odd meters. There's a little correction factor in there, but let's call it 45 meters. It would be 21% oxygen and 35% helium. And then if you go beyond that, the next depth mixture, next gas mixture would be 18% oxygen and 45% helium. And if you go even deeper to around that 70 meter mark, 210 foot mark, you'll be diving 15% oxygen, which is hypoxic, and 55% helium. And so you have to have strategies around how you're going to dive those gases, particularly the hypoxic gases, safely. And they're tools and training protocols that have come up to make those transitions safe.
And are you doing that as you go down? Are you changing your mixtures, or is that something that you preset because you already know?
Yeah. So on open circuit, so those are the scuba tanks on your back, and you blow bubbles. You pre-plan the dive, and you blend the gas for the dive that is planned. And each gas has a maximum operating depth. So you wouldn't go beyond those spaces because of the oxygen toxicity, and there's a degree of worker breathing that goes with it too. So, and then together with that, you have a decompression strategy, which has a similar. You have to plan for the gases where you'll switch from your gas on your back to a couple of tanks you have that you've clipped off on your side, to either 50% oxygen or 100% oxygen when you're really shallow at 6 meters or 20 feet. So you do those gas switches on your decompression stops on the way up, yeah.
And when you're going down, if you're in the hypoxic gas, so say you have a dive, you're going down to 70 meters, then are you feeling short of breath as you're going down? Are you feeling the effects of, oxygen deprivation, or as you're trying to go down?
No. So what the protocol?
Forgive my ignorance here.
No. There's no ignorance at all, because this is a common question. I had the same question when I first started thinking of diving these deep, should we say, these rarefied gases, as it were. And I had exactly that question: how do we make this safe? So it turns out that the way we make this safe is that you don't jump in the water on the hypoxic gas. You don't breathe in the hypoxic gas. You're breathing actually from one of your decompression bottles. You're on one of your decompression cylinders, the one your deepest decompression gas. So that for most of us, that would be 50% oxygen, which you can safely breathe down to around 21 meters, 70 feet. But we typically drop down to 10 meters, and then you switch to your travel gas and your back gas. You store that regulator to be used on the way up for decompression. So you don't. It's interesting. We're not designed to feel hypoxia terribly well. That's not a. We're remarkably resistant, we're insensitive to hypoxia. We're way more sensitive to PCO2, to hypocarbia, than we are, and hypoventilation, than we are to hypoxia. That's how divers get into trouble, and free divers get into trouble. When they ascend from depth, those who have just descended on a lung full of gas and that's all they have, there's a critical threshold that they exceed, and they don't even know what happens, and then they black out. It's called a shallow water blackout. If there's no rescue plan or no observer diver, you can drown, or you will drown. Yeah.
Spoken like a true anesthesiologist.
Yeah.
So you're like, yeah, it's fine. Just mix this gas and this gas and this gas. The rest of us are like, hey.
No, it's a more complex than that. I'm just a dumb diver. I just breathe it in, breathe out. I don't mess it up because I could die. I could die otherwise.
So I know that they have a lot of stuff around here when you're talking about these technical dives and going into structures or whatever. I know that around here they have a lot of artificial reefs where they've sunken boats and I think like an airplane or something like that out here. Do you go to those places, or is that kind of like,
No, we go there. There are a couple of reefs that are really close to Nanaimo, 20-minute boat ride. The HMCS Saskatchewan and the Cape Breton are two ex-Canadian warships that were sank as artificial reefs. There are another couple on the mainland or off the mainland. So they're really accessible to us, and they're great. There's a sunken tug also just off the harbor, the Nanaimo harbor here. So lots of opportunity to dive artificial reefs. And the Saskatchewan is one of the ones that was sunk early. And speaking of correction, it would have been like the late 1990s, I think. It truly is a pretty boat because it's so full of life. Just covered in plumos and anemones. If folks want to look online, there's a lot of video and photographs of this boat taken by divers. Really well structured photographs, way more than I could have taken on any given day. But good photographers, firstly, but and with really well composed pictures. With additional lights and things. But if folks look online, certainly Facebook's one of those places to look for the HMCS Saskatchewan and have a peek at some of those pictures. It's a glorious boat to dive on. And yes, there's an aircraft down near Chemainus. There's a 737 that was sunk off there several years ago, and it too has got very pretty colonies of plumos and anemones on them.
I don't know. Yeah, that sounds great. I would love to be in the kind of the room of just thinking about, hey, what can we sink and go swim through?
That's right. I don't know. I have no idea how this all happens, but it happens. There's a whole society driven by this and that governs it. So that's and it's I wouldn't say it's well resourced, but it's well respected and because they do a good job. These boats they're not haphazardly sank. They're very deliberately cleaned up and decommissioned, and then very well planned holes cut in the side so that if divers wish to enter the structure of it, they're and cables have been removed. All the haphazard of real wrecks has largely been excluded, but the hazard of being in an over environment, of course, still remains.
And I assume that is, to me now that listening to you saying about overhead diving and getting into structures, that is extraordinarily at least a different level of difficulty and danger than just going down and checking out a reef. And
for me, it is. Others might feel differently, but I in an overhead environment, I'm not comfortable. It's not a comfortable place for me. That said, I don't have formal training in a cave environment, so I've never done cave type training. But folks who do it, and I've got several friends who do this and do it really well. And there's some caves on the North Island that people dive, just north of near Campbell River Was. Up there, there's a series of caves. That said, there's specific training that goes with it because you can imagine this is a very real hard ceiling that it's not just swimming for the surface and maybe get the bends. This is a case if you don't know your way out or you don't know how to problem solve things, you can get yourself into a pile of hurt really quickly.
You're in real trouble.
Yeah. And using the Thai cave example, the cave rescue example, where a diver drowned in that environment. One of the Thai SEALs drowned, probably because the training they're not typically trained for extreme cave diving, and the rescuers were all high performance, remarkable cave divers working in a highly structured team. So
So when we were talking about that, just in kind of our little phone call before, I was talking to my wife about you saying that one of the doctors kind of went in and he was one of the highly trained guys who actually put the kids to sleep in a capsule. I didn't even look this up. But what happened with that? Are you familiar with any of that, or?
So I know a little bit about it. I can't talk to the specifics because I don't know all of the specifics. But Richard Harris is an ICU anesthesiologist bloke out of Australia, and his teammate, Craig Chalice, is a veterinary surgeon. They happen to be the follow-up team after the British team had found the Thai soccer team, and they went through many iterations. Actually, Richard Harris has a podcast, and he talks with Craig Chalice about how they went through the iterations of how they were going to get these youngsters out of this cave. It was more than just a challenge. So if I may sort of plug the Richard Harris's podcast, it's called High Risk. It'll come to me in a moment.
Okay.
And he talks directly about how it was, there were ethical and moral dilemmas, because what happens if kids died, and when would they quit if the first couple died, those sorts of things. And it's called Real Risk, the podcast, Real Risk. And so what they did was they opted with Craig Chalice as a veterinary surgeon. He had more experience of ketamine and midazolam, or one of the benzodiazepines, than Richard would have had. That was the decision, was they were going to use a combination of either atropine glycopyrrolate to clear up the secretions or dry them up, and then use ketamine and a benzo and anesthetize these kids, put them in a full face mask, then have them breathe spontaneously while being accompanied by 2 other divers with each transit, with each of these kids. And remarkable, no one drowned. Luck, skill, blessing. Yeah. I don't know, a whole pile of things came together, in a really good way. And there were teams of divers. They didn't dive any of the kids out themselves. Other divers took the kids out. They just anesthetized them. Or just anesthetize.
Just anesthetize a child before throwing them in the water in a cave. Yeah, that's all you did. Yeah. That's kind of the more extreme end of what doctors can do with their diving skills.
Totally. And very, very, and obviously very accomplished individuals, both as divers, and they're very accomplished cave explorers. There's a team, they've recently tried hydrogen as their diluent, because helium has its own set of consequences at depth. You get quite a profound tremor as helium builds up in the blood as you get to greater and greater depths. So it impairs your ability to function at depth. So they just started undertaking hydrogen as their blending gas on one of their deep dive projects. They've got a dive project called the Pierce Resurgence in New Zealand. And they've been as deep as about 250 or 260 meters now. That's a long way from help.
That's a long way from help. Wow.
It's 30 meters. It takes you, 30 minutes down there will buy you about 17 hours of decompression time. It's a long time to get home.
So when you have to do that, where do you decompress?
Almost all of us will decompress in open water. And in some of these deeper dives, they'll build habitats at depth with its own life support built into it, the rebreather with the scrubber, the CO2 scrubber, some communications, and a heating element in the system, because most of us would, in the cold environments, will use a heated undergarment, and certainly for the longer dives, they'll plug into these added heating elements so that they could stay warm. They can sit on a ledge maybe in this environment, in an air bubble or gas bubble, and breathe off a regulator at the appropriate gas, and then so they would decompress at that stage and stay relatively warm because they have half their body out of the water, but still plugged into a heating element. That's not commonplace. That takes a lot of planning and organization.
Sounds like a lot of money too. That doesn't sound like that's off the shelf at the Nanaimo dive shop.
There's nothing off the shelf there. I think it's a case of open your wallet and I work for MasterCard or something.
Yeah. Like, sure, we can make it work out, right? So what other things have you gotten into, aside from the Global Underwater Explorers? What other things have you gotten yourself into through diving?
Yeah, so through diving, maybe there are a couple of, so in the diving space around here, there's another organization. So Thermocline is a dive-related organization. It belongs to this friend of mine who was my first instructor in the GU world. His name is Guy Shockey, who lives down in Maple Bay. And through him, he both teaches scuba and he's involved with the Underwater Archaeological Society of BC. So we get to play a little in those spaces because they have wrecks that they are aware of, but some of them are beyond the recreational limits. And so we're able to do the technical side of the house. And so we've done some exploration on the Saanich Inlet Way and Saanich Peninsula. And there are a few ships that with some tragedy with the loss of life that we explored last year. So we've got to be a little, there's some respect that is their due. And not necessarily all the sites are well, they're not well documented, but they're certainly not they're not commonplace. And the knowledge of their whereabouts is not commonplace, and that's intentional. But what's neat about diving within the Canadian context on these wrecks is that these wrecks can't be plundered because by law they remain either become the province or the federal. They're the federal. They don't have any private value. Put it that way. They remain the purview of either the province or the federal system. And so they're well preserved with artifacts. You don't take artifacts off of them. And the other thing I've done is also through the diving space, come to meet a bloke called Gareth Locke, and he owns a couple of companies, one of which is called the Human Diver. And the Human Diver is, and I've recently become an instructor within that network. There are about 13 of us across the globe, and I'm one of a few in Canada. 3 of us in Canada. And interesting, one of the others is actually an anesthesiologist in Montreal. She's the PADI for anesthesia out there. So we work together and collaboratively to try and share the message that while diving has technical skills, and that's sort of an accepted way of doing business, but where often folks get into trouble or what we don't always appreciate well is those non-technical skills around psychological safety, good communication structures, what a good teamwork looks like, how that interfaces with technical skill base. And so, shall we say, our mission is to try and move this non-technical skill set, this human factors process, into the agencies of diving. Because they're applied elsewhere. Medicine is a space they're applied well. Space, nuclear industry, aeronautics and aviation, it's part of their makeup, it's part of their culture to apply human factors. So I'm part of this group. We're trying to move it in a more structured way into the diving space.
Okay. Yeah. So that seems like that's probably something that, again, like you said, this carries over into medicine and so many other aspects. But as an anesthesiologist, you're not the only person in the OR trying to get that patient safely through a surgery from induction back to waking them up and recovery, right? So this is something that's really applicable not only to you, but to a lot of other people as well.
Totally. And my hope is in the next little bit to try and sort of introduce it a bit to our local healthcare network here. Through both simulation and the like.
Yeah. So how do you do that? I mean, is that something that you teach everybody who knows how to scuba dive how to do these things? Or is this, bringing simulation into the OR, the ICU, or what do you do?
Within the diving space, I'll use that as our metaphor, and then I'll bring it into the medical space thereafter. So the diving space is one area where folks have, I think, largely assumed that it's all about technical skill set. And most dives go well, which is true. However, The reality is none of us has gills, and it's a high consequence if things go bad underwater.
Yeah, low likelihood, extremely high consequence.
Right, absolutely. And it's seemingly it's easy to ignore. It's perhaps even fortuitous from an agency perspective to ignore that complications or the risks are low, and certainly don't advertise that the consequences are high. That ratio that gets warm bums into seats every week, every month, whatever, and gets them to buy dive equipment and go dive, gets folks to buy dive equipment and go diving. And thankfully, most times things go well. It's when these cases that make the news come up and people say, wow, how did that ever happen? And then it spurs an interest in these other options and opportunities, like what are the human factors? Because human error in and of itself doesn't explain the problem. It just, shall we say, blames the person with a regulator or no regulator or whatever and they often don't have a story to tell because they've died.
Right.
It's the survivor that tells
you what happened.
Yeah. And so then we create stories around that, silly mistake, poor choices, bad judgment, whatever. And and once again, it's sort of, we make it a blameworthy enterprise because then It's easy for us to distance ourselves and say, we would never do that. That was dumb. However, if you look at the data, it's often what we do. And certainly I can mention many occasions, personal occasions, where I'm grateful for teams, where they help you with little things that could go awry at the worst part of your diet, which you deal with at the front end, and it's because of the team you've made a safer environment. And the surgical safety checklist in the operating room has done some of that. And so checklists are part of this whole process. So getting back to the diving space, as we've moved into other agencies and encouraged people to take part in these learnings around the non-technical skill set, we have access to a proprietary video game, as it were, and it's written for this teaching. And it was written by and is being adapted by a chap whose dad is, and I speak under correction, but he's the chief flying officer for Lufthansa, who needed something to teach crew resource management. And so it's deliberately designed to be a really, really glitchy game. And you play in teams. So there's competition. So it brings out all of our human behaviors and communication skills, good and bad, goal-directed approaches, whatever. All of those things come out. So we normally host this over a 2-day course with some didactic presentations around communication skill sets, understanding human behaviors, how all the stuff that we spoke about earlier around teamwork, situation awareness. And then it's a scalable game, so that as the 2 days go on, the game becomes more complex and the demands on the players become greater. And in the beginning, folks can wear the mask quite well. The facade falls off somewhere when the heat turns up on about the third mission, maybe. And so we use that as a teaching tool, or to allow folks to become aware of their own humanity and where their tough word failings, but where their deficiencies exist, and how they can, when you become aware of it, you can address it. And so that's the process that is currently being used. I say it's a proprietary game. So we pay for access to it, and you pay for the missions, but you get folks into a room, at least 6 folks at a time, 6 or 7. And then you can scale it up, and it's really a neat environment by which to want to see your own behaviors, be informed by others of your blind spots, because we have them. It's just who we are.
Yeah, we all have them. We just don't know what they are. It's blind spots.
That's exactly, and we have them. So that's my newer interest in both the diving space and then in medicine, as I play a little in the administrative world here in medicine. So if I have this opportunity to bring it into our group, that'd be it'd be a challenge, but it's a hope.
If there is a young, well, actually probably not young, but if there is a doctor out there who is not scuba diving, how do you get started with all of this? How do you get started?
In the big picture, find a recognized training agency or shop. They're often associated with shops, not all though, because I'll use once again, GUE is not typically associated with a store. They can be associated with stores, but many times instructors are independent of stores. It's deliberately, I think it's deliberate, that structure. Whereas, for instance, I'll use PADI as my alternate because that's what I know best. It's the other one I know best in our local environment. There's a store in town, or 2 stores in town that are regarded as PADI training centers or training agencies, and they'll have instructors that train for courses. And the basic open water course is where we all start off. Each of the agencies I mentioned have got an underwater course. The one in the global underwaters world, it's called Fundamentals Basics, and which then can be embellished and grown upon, and as your foundation grows. And then open water is the other, through the the PADI environment. Straightforward. Starting costs are somewhere, I'd be guessing somewhere around $1,000 for a course. Many times dive stores, if it's through a store, will have dry suits for rental and equipment for rental. And I anticipate the most folks who get into the GUE world will have already done some splashing around, might have a dry suit, and likely to have regulator fins and a mask.
Yeah, no. So the dry suit, very, very important up here. The water, I've said multiple times on this podcast, is disgustingly cold.
Absolutely.
And so this is something that you would use dry suits as opposed to wetsuits.
Totally.
For the most part, or like kind of what temperature ranges would you go to a dry suit, or does everybody who dives just go in a dry suit?
So I think we each have tolerances that we were comfy getting.
Mine are very low, very low tolerance.
Mine are really low. I remember jumping for a boat in, so when I dive Mexico, I dive my dry suit. Just don't drive in a wetsuit. I remember jumping off a boat a couple of years ago in Hawaii, in Maui, in a wetsuit, thinking this is just terrible. So you're asking someone who you could probably label as a wimp. I don't know.
I would not label you that, because whatever is below a wimp is where I would be. I don't like wading in the cold water. I'm not a fan.
Yeah, I'm not this cold water immersion kind of guy. But I think probably a threshold somewhere around 16, 18 degrees C, people will dive a wetsuit. And actually, if I use my South African experience, when I was resident in South Africa, when we lived there, I never dived a dry suit. It was always only wetsuit. And the waters down in Cape Town where it would be 13, 14, 15. It was chilly in the winter. And even now, I was back in South Africa in September last year, and I went for a couple of dives, and I took my dry suit along, and all the other folks diving on the boat were in wetsuits. Some of it's cultural, and some of it's got to do with cost. The dry suits are not inexpensive. They do require a little extra training, because you have another bubble of gas you've got to think about managing, besides your buoyancy compensator and the gas you have in your lungs. So you have an additional bubble of gas. You've got to think about where you're going to manage, how you're going to manage that bubble in order to maintain neutral buoyancy, or get rid of it as you ascend.
So that's what I was trying to figure out, because I did sign up for a scuba class course when we first moved here with my sons, when I had some extra time and was waiting for everything to come through, but it didn't work out just because of the COVID restrictions, and they couldn't get pool time, and they couldn't do all this, that, and the other thing. But I saw that there was a certification that you got, that you, along with your course, was a dry suit certification. So,
right.
For sure, I would get that. My daughter and I checked a couple of days ago, and 2 blocks from my house is Willows Beach, and the water is 9 degrees Celsius. So that's, like 46, 47 degrees. And in the summer, it heats all the way up to 11. And it is just atrocious. And so it is not warm down here on this end.
No, and it doesn't warm up much either up island. I mean, when you have those shallow sand flats, it'll warm up nicely over those shallow sand flats, and you might have a thermocline. A thermocline that hangs out in the top 4 or 5 meters, maybe a bit deeper, where it's like 18 or so degrees Celsius at the height of summer. But then you get down to beneath that thermocline, and it's sort of ice cream headache territory, like 12 degrees Celsius and colder. It is what it is. It is what it is. So in my head, it's a dry suit with a well-fitting hood and dry gloves, all of those things.
You do that, and once you get kind of that, is that like the open water diving? That's more kind of like a recreational thing. Yeah. So if you did want to get your own equipment, how much does it cost to buy tanks and a regulator and fins and all that stuff?
So most folks will start out with fins and a mask and maybe a snorkel. Once again, this is an agency thing there, but because there's limited value. I mean, if I'm going to snorkel, then I'm going to snorkel, but I'm not going to drag it along on the side of my scuba thing. It'll snag hose configurations, and the light just gets in the way. It doesn't help me, and I'm under the water. It doesn't help you in the cave. Many times you'll start out with mask, snorkel, and fins, and they would run you probably in the region of $150, maybe $200 for that taken as a whole. And if I have any recommendation, you should buy a well-fitting mask and a fins that will last you through your training and beyond. So they're brands we can talk around at some point if ever you're interested, but most dive stores are reputable places. They'll point you in the right direction. Then we start to get into expensive stuff like regulators and a tank. Unless regulators, I think, are important to have because you get to be familiar with your regulator, and you become responsible for its annual servicing, or every 100 divers, or however the manufacturer decides you should service your regulator. And as for a tank, that'd be in the region of a couple of $100 for an aluminum, a few hundred for a steel. And the value of the one over the other is that in a dry suit environment, you need to carry less lead if you've got a steel tank on your back, because it's more negatively buoyant than an aluminum is. And when aluminum is empty, it's positively buoyant. So you get to carry less lead if you have a steel tank. But most dive stores will rent you steel tanks for a very reasonable price with a gas fill. So unless you're diving a lot and you have a specific configuration you want to dive, like doubles or maybe a side mount configuration, the back mount stuff is readily available at very reasonable rental rates. And similarly for dry suits, if you don't have a dry suit, many of the dive stores have rental dry suits, and they're in good nick. They're in good condition, and they're well looked after. Also relatively inexpensive, because dry suits are fairly expensive.
That's wonderful news, and I really appreciate this. So any advice, so if somebody wants to get out or is maybe a little bit hesitant about getting started, any advice for me, and say you just have like your dumb friend, like my friend Bill and I, that want to go out and get started. So, or maybe there's some hesitation. Any advice for people who, when they want to get started?
So maybe a couple of things. One is as we talked about maybe right at the beginning, is look at your local dive stores. These folks are always very approachable. That's in my experience anyway. And in addition to that, some of the dive stores will have a Discover Scuba program, and with some pool instruction, and I think it might even include an open water dive. Don't quote me on that one. There's an opportunity to get out into the water with close supervision to have a feel for what scuba might feel like, and whether it turns your crank or not. So that might be a place to start. And if you're looking for a specific instructor of sorts, I can point you in some direction if those things if those are questions you would like.
A couple of things just to plug, I guess, the Human Diver,
yes,
Global Underwater Explorers. So take Mark's class.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're looking for GUE instructors, there are 3 on the island. We have a pretty high density of instructors for the population we serve. One in Victoria, one in Maple Bay, and one in Chemainus. So and each of those has a little. There's some overlap on what they teach. Like Guy Shockey in Maple Bay teaches everything up to and including the highest CCR and technical levels of diving. Jason Cook does something similar in Victoria, and Nick Bowman does the fundamental side of the house as well as the underwater scooter stuff. So there's lots of skilled divers, experienced and skilled divers down on the island within the GUE community. In the PADI community, 2 dive stores I know in Nanaimo. There's a variety of skills and expertise of their instructors, from the basics to the more advanced, including some of the technical stuff like wreck diving and the like.
This has all been very helpful and extraordinarily fascinating, and I really appreciate you taking the time and for reaching out. So again, this is just another plug to look around, talk to the people around you, because people do fascinating things and you just never know what somebody is into. So take the time, look around, go out to dinner with people, and find out these things, because one day you may find yourself in a sunken 737 with each other. So who knows?
Love it. Who knows? Yeah, no, it's Rob, it's been an absolute pleasure to hook up and have a conversation. This has been a wonderful time.
Thank you. I really do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you soon. Thank you for listening to another episode of the InterestingMD podcast. Please check out my content on YouTube at InterestingMD, and follow me on TikTok, Blue Sky, Instagram, Threads, and Facebook at the InterestingMD, and on X at InterestingMD. If you have comments or questions and want to get in touch with me or any of my guests, please DM me on socials or email me at rob@interestingmd.com. If you have any ideas for a show and you want to share your hobbies with me, or don't know where to get started on your own project, you can email ideas@interestingmd.com. Please like and subscribe to the podcast and YouTube channel to get the latest content. Much appreciation to Falter Media for editing, producing, and posting all InterestingMD content. Check them out, because if they can do this for me, imagine what they can do for you. See you next week.